introduction here. So Doug works as the Director of Dairy Herd Information Services for CentralStar Cooperative, and recently added to his resume part-time homeschool teacher. So like many of us, having fun with the pandemic now. So again, Doug, thanks for joining us this morning and looking forward to learning a little more on PCDart.
Thanks, Barry. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be back, and hopefully can share some more information today. I've got a little bit of an eclectic mix of things to share that I put together. I want to finish up. We didn't have time last time to go through all of the tracker series, so there's 2 more, conception and maternity tracker, that I want to go through briefly and touch on a few points, and then we're going to circle back to some of the other things we discussed and utilize a little bit more of the user-defined reports, temp groups, some report options and crosstabs. With the current situation in our industry, thought there might be a few things there that would be worth reviewing. So we're going to go ahead and get started just by diving into, we covered last time activity tracker, and I'm going to move a little bit into conception tracker. So reproductive monitoring obviously is very important, and the tracker series, the conception tracker, was one of the first trackers PCDart brought about, and was their answer to being able to dive a little bit deeper and do better than the standard reports in tracking conception rates and breaking things apart. So it looks just like all the other trackers, a lot of different fields and variables you can set. So I'll just skim through those a little bit here. It's going to default to looking at cows, all lactations, but we certainly have an option here to set those lactation groups for a specific lactation if you're interested. It's going to default to looking at the last 12 months of data relative to today's date. You can set up different predefined filters in here, relative to reference date or relative to last test date, and those can be saved. So up here at the top, you've got different settings. I don't typically use this feature, but I know some that do, where if you are constantly looking at the same different conception rate by technician or by breeding trigger, et cetera, that you like to look at, and you don't want to have to go through and set the filters each time, you can set these up and save them, and PCDart will load them for you when you come back in. So we'll go through a little bit of how you do that here in a second, but that is available. And throughout these other tabs, we've got the main tab here of animal filters. The breeding filters tab is where we'll do a lot of slicing and dicing based on the breeding triggers up here that are defined in PCDart. Those all exist up here in this top table. And they're going to default all being selected, all breeding triggers, day of the week, service default, including everything, but I have the ability to remove those and select specific technicians simply by highlighting and sending them across to the box that I want to preview. To get started, I'm just going to preview this report and make a couple key points, or preview conception rates as it stands, as the default would be when you open up the program, to just point out a few things. It's going to get you to this table looking at conception rate by month. You're going to end up here in March. You can see was the last month we had reported, February was the last month we had reported pregnancies. And we've got a list of the number that were bred each month, the number that were pregnant, the number open, and then our conception rates. And if I follow that down, you can see this herd has pretty good conception rates in the 40s. And then this last month is really seen a drop off here in February. And that's something you're going to have no matter what you do when you open up this conception tracker, if you don't adjust your end date. And so I want to point that out, because what happens is we've got this others category over here, where we've got cows that exist that have never had a diagnosis. We have no known diagnoses on these cows. And so what PCDart will do is move them into the other category because they don't belong in the calculation of conception rate. Previously, on the standard reports that you'll find in the reproductive management set, you can see over here the conception rate landscape or conception rate for AI technicians. Those cows end up making their way into the calculations, and so you'll get the data changed just a little bit. But in this last month, you can see we have an awful lot of cows that are other, and that makes sense because they haven't been preg checked. What will happen is as cows are rebred and there's a known status and we know that those cows are open, they're going to continue to populate this open field, and that's going to increase the denominator and reduce your conception rate artificially. So what I want to do is I want to make sure the time window that I'm looking at, it ends roughly on the day that my last known pregnant cow was bred. And Tracker makes that pretty easy to figure out. All I need to do is click on this number 98, which is the last month we have pregnancy data for. And just like in the activity tracker I showed last time, that's going to bring up a list of all of those cows. And I'm simply going to click this header to sort it in descending order. So I can see that on February 21st, excuse me, was the last bred date for a known pregnant animal. And so if I close out of here, what I'm going to do is take this ending date and I'm going to shift that back to the 21st of February. So now I'm looking at only cows that were bred up until February 21st, and I'm going to have a little bit more complete data set. We'll go ahead and let that load, and I'm sure we're going to see that 29% conception rate change, and we did. It went up to 34. So just be aware that that last series of numbers there is something you need to be aware is a little bit in flux with the different preg check options. And that February 21st number is going to come into play again when we look at pregnancy rates here in a minute. So I'm going to write that down because I also use that to make sure that my pregnancy rate report is as complete as possible. So we can go ahead and looking at this by month, we have a drop-down filter up here, or a drop-down list where I can choose to look at this in different views. I can view it by technician by simply changing the drop down and clicking change view. That's pretty easy to do. Now I've got my list of technicians. I've got the percent of breedings that they represent. You can see we've got 2 main technicians on this farm and a couple that do a little bit of breeding, and I can see their overall conception rates. The next thing I wanted to show you in here was how you can save or load reports. So for instance, I might like to come in here and look at first service conception routinely. So what I did to make this setting was I came in and I simply said, I want to unselect all service numbers, and I'm going to go ahead and just say, only show me first service. And when I do that and preview it by month, I'm going to go from looking at all services to all first services. Pretty straightforward, not very complicated. I can save that setting, which I've already done here, as first service conception. When you come into the tracker series, all you need to do is highlight your save settings, hit the load button, and it's going to go ahead and change. You can see I've named this one time day I first service for first lactation, and I've got it by technician. Everybody's got, again, their own flavor of ways they're going to want to look at things. There was one question that came in. It was, can you put conception rates in a cross table so you could have all technicians by all breeding triggers? And the answer is no. There's no way to do that in PCDart. You're going to need to look at those individually. I do want to point out that over in the settings, just like we had an activity tracker, we talked about making temp groups last time. Sometimes you might want to see the impact of a certain situation on conception. It could be somatic cell. It could be cows who had a case of metritis or retained placentas. You might want to put those cows in a temporary group and then look at the impact on conception. And you can do that here with the temp groups. I'm not going to do that today because we went over how to do that last time. So if you need to know how to do that, you can watch the last video. But you could assign a temp group number and put those in here to see the differences in conceptions. I want to move over to preg rate next because that is something that there's always a lot of questions on how to get that as accurate as possible. And I guess I'll pause for a second, Barry, and just see if there's any questions specific to conception tracker.
No, not so far. Nope.
Okay, very good. We'll keep trucking then. So I'm going to go ahead and close conception tracker. I know I went through that really fast, but it's a pretty basic tool. You really just need to get in and play with these different filters and you'll figure it out. I'm going to go ahead and close that. Pregnancy rate in PCDart exists down in the reproductive management set. It's the 126 report. And when I highlight that, as everybody well knows, we've got options to put in our voluntary waiting periods. And the first thing I always want to do is assess what is the voluntary waiting period on this farm. or at least what's actually being done. The way I like to do that is in the standard cow graphs. There's a report, a scatter plot already built called days in milk at first bred. So if I just click on that report, I'm going to get a scatter plot of when cows are bred by their days in milk for this herd. So you can see this herd is quite a scatter shotgun blast of first breedings. I'm not interested in that trend line, so I'm going to take that off. And you can see I've got everybody bunched off to the left. So here's a little trick with PCDart that I like. I've got this outlier cow way over here. She's 1,350 days in milk, and she's making my graph look a little bit funny. So if I'm curious about who that cow is, all you've got to do in PCDart is double click on any of these dots, and it will bring you to that cow's individual page. So I can go in here and look and see, okay, this is a cull cow. She's been DNB'd. She was bred a number of times. They went ahead and DNB'd her at 296 days in milk, and she's been milking in the herd since then. She's now 1,305 days in milk. So she's skewing my report a little bit, but I can fix that by simply drawing a box. All I'm doing is going into the upper right-hand corner, and I'm going to drag this box over the cows I want to look at. And now I can spread those out a little bit and get rid of that outlier. I'm going to partition this by lactation so that I can see if there is a difference in voluntary waiting periods. So red would be my first lactation, blue and green, second and third plus lactations. And I can see that there is a little bit of a difference between when they're starting to breed those first lactations there and when the mature cows are getting bred. So I'm going to go ahead and filter this, and I'm going to look at just first lactation first. And so now I've got those on the screen, and I'm going to insert my crosshairs. By doing that, I can drag my crosshairs all the way to the right. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to move that line down until I have about 5%. So right there, I'm at 4.9%. If you look on the bottom right-hand portion of the screen, and I can see that that's at about 72 days. So my first lactation are getting their first service. 5% of them have their first service by 72 days in milk. And I can quickly go ahead and do that for the mature cows simply by changing it to that lactation group to see what their voluntary waiting periods. And I apologize, I put this big purple pointer in to make it easy to see, and it makes it a little harder on my end to manipulate. But I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to bring that down and move it until I get to about 5%. And again, if my mouse wasn't so gigantic, it might be a little easier, but we end up at about 60 days for those mature cows. So now that I've decided what my voluntary waiting period is, I can make sure that that's put in here. I'm going to go ahead and put 62 in and 72 for that first lactation group. And we'll go ahead and just preview this report. So we've got the standard 126 preg rate report up. I look up in the upper left-hand corner. I can see there's no exclusions. I'll explain what that means in a second. I can see I've got my voluntary waiting period set, and I can see the pregnancy rates down the side here. I mentioned earlier that we would want to remember that 221 date, because I can see right now that the last date of my last 21-day period that has data is set to February 10th. And I know that I have pregnant cows that were bred all the way out to February 21st. This is my way to do this. It's not necessarily the only way, but knowing that those cows are about 10 days past where the report was ending up, all I'm going to do is change this palpation vet check date a little further out in the future until I can get that last known date to line up. And I'm missing by 1 day, so I'm going to go ahead and kick it out one more to the 17th. Excuse me, I did that wrong, to the 3rd. And we should end on the 21st now. So now I know this is a complete date, and I know that date is about as good as I can make it. Because again, when you just open up the standard report, if you don't change those dates, you're going to be looking at a time frame that might be a little bit different and might not be as complete as what you think it is. So that's how I look at pregnancy rate. That's how I assess the voluntary waiting periods, and how I manipulate the 21-day periods to get the most complete data I can. Now, I did mention or reference this no exclusions, and that's something you want to pay attention to, I think, because you have the ability in PCDart over here on the right. There's a constraints tab where we can filter the cows that are included in the pregnancy rate report. So you can see I can exclude cows that are greater than 365 days and neither pregnant nor dry, and I can exclude cows that began their lactation by an abortion. When I exclude those cows and open the report, you'll notice that it will tell me that I'm excluding those animals. And of course, it does have an impact on the pregnancy rate by taking out those reproductive failures. So just be aware that those numbers are there. I tend to look at this report without those exclusions on. We did attempt to breed those cows, and so I believe they need to be in the data set, but you can make your own decisions on that. You can also set some controls here by group if you wish, if you want to look at specific groups, but realize you're only going to look at cows that currently exist in those groups, not every cow that was in that group in her lactation. Another point I wanted to make that goes between pregnancy rate and conception tracker that I use in tandem is trying to evaluate heat detection rate. So this dairy in particular, you notice the shotgun blast, they use an activity monitor, use a lot of timed AI, but we have the heat detection rate, or the submission rate as I like to call it here, calculated in the pregnancy rate report. And one thing as you evaluate pregnancy rate, you might be evaluating a couple different things. One is the pregnancy rate for the herd and the heat detection or submission rate on a herd basis, on a macro level, but we might also want to evaluate our ability to rebreed cows efficiently. And that could be an AI technician, could be an on-farm technician or a service that comes in. It also could be something like one of these activity systems that this herd is employing. So if I were to measure its ability to get cows rebred, how would I do that effectively, since I know that timed AI cows are forced into here, even though this dairy uses very few? So the way I like to do that is actually in Conception Tracker. So we're going to go back into Conception Tracker, and we're just going to look at the service heat interval. So I'm going to leave the defaults. Well, excuse me, I'm going to change my date back because I know that my date is good through the 21st of February. And then I'm going to look at the actual interval. And I'm just going to preview that for the whole herd. And this is a common report in a lot of different softwares that you can find is this interval analysis to see when cows are getting rebred. And I like to look at this because I want to see how many cows in this 18 to 24 or quote unquote normal repeat cycle are getting rebred. And you can see on this dairy, 47% of those of the intervals are getting bred in 18 to 24 days, which is about as high as I've ever seen. That's really quite astounding. You can also get a look here at how many cows are having long intervals. You can look for impacts on maybe not preg checking often enough. This dairy does preg check weekly, and they don't have very many of these tail enders, but you'll find herds that have these long 36 and greater than 48-day intervals in between breeding. Certainly could be an indication of poor heat detection, could also be an indication that they're not sinking cows fast enough, or they're not preg checking frequently enough. So I like to use this report to get a little bit of an insight there. And the nice thing with this too is if I wanted to look at individual technicians, I can do that. So if we have multiple technicians operating in a farm, which I know we do in this dairy, I can look at an individual technician and their interval to see if their ability to catch cows in heat is equal or similar to others. I can also see if they're making the right decisions on these odd intervals. So I can see technician 2 has bred 4% of their breedings that were 4 to 17 days after their initial breeding, with a 25% conception rate, which is a little bit concerning. Certainly some cystic cows could exist within that group that are actually showing estrus and are getting bred, but something that we want to pay attention to for the difference in the conception, as well as the percent that are actually getting bred there. So that's a little bit about how I chase heat detection. There's different ways to pull that number out. Certainly off the 126 report, there's some standard graphs for heat detection in PCDart. I don't think any of them are wrong. I think it's just about what data they include and what you're really trying to chase. So That's about as far as I was going to go with conception, traction, and preg rate. I'll just pause briefly again, Barry, and see if there is any questions before I move on.
Nope, no questions on this. Thanks.
All right, great. We will forge ahead. There's one more tracker that I wanted to just touch on, which was Maternity Tracker. It's a pretty interesting tool. Again, it's set up just like all the other trackers are. There's a lot of filters, a lot of drop boxes. It's intimidating when you first open it, but when you start playing with it, it's really pretty intuitive. And I'm going to just go ahead and preview it. We're going to look at all calvings, all lactations for the last 12 months. So let's just take a look and see what that gives us to view. And you'll see here we have the last 12 months. We've got the number of calvings, the number of calves born alive, born dead, heifers alive and dead, the number of abortions. We've got the percent dead, which is an interesting or a valuable number to track, percent female and percent twins. It also gives you days dry and days carried calf or gestation length, which is sometimes a valuable tool. And that's one that I'll look at on farms by lactation. So I'm going to go ahead and change that to lactation group and preview this. And you'll see here now we can see the percent of females that are coming out of each lactation. 66% females out of first lactation, 59 out of second, 48 out of third. You can tell right away this farm is using some gender selected semen in those animals, and it's having an impact. I can also see that the gestation length on their heifers is about 5 days or 4 days less than their mature cows. I always like to take a look at this. I've seen wider spreads on herds than this. I've also seen it much closer, but with the enough data, making sure that their dry cow reports are set up correctly. And if they think they're going to give those first lactation a longer dry period, and yet they're operating on a shorter gestation length, they need to account for that. So if on average, those cows are calving 4 days shorter or sooner than our mature animals, we need to make sure the settings in our dry cow reports are appropriate so that they get the dry period that we're shooting for. So that's certainly something I wanted to point out for the second lactation, I guess, to make sure that that we're aware of those different numbers. Gender selected semen is always one people are interested in, to look at sexed semen and the percent of heifers from gender selected semen. So does it work? And I've not found a herd where it doesn't. 93% of the animals bred to gender selected semen are female on this farm. 50% of the non-sexed are female, so right where you would expect those to be. The percent twins, the percent deads, you can see. I get a lot of questions about, does it work, or do we have more dead heifers? Are they easier calvings, things that way. So I always try to go to the farm's data. In Maternity Tracker, I'll let you do that. You can dig in and see what the numbers show on their farm. There's a lot of ways to, another thing that I like to look at is day of the week in Maternity Tracker. When we're chasing a lot of dead calves on a farm or more DOAs than we'd like to see, I'll look at it by day of the week. This farm's not going to show us much of a change, but now what I can see is the percent dead calves that show up on each individual day of the week. And it's not uncommon to see those weekends, or particularly Mondays, end up with a higher number of dead calves. Maybe it's a different crew. Maybe they're not as attentive. Maybe people just leave things to the normal crew for the next week. But that gives you a little bit of insight into your shift changes, and if there needs to be some retraining, or if there's any anomalies there. So this dairy is relatively consistent, but I've seen the weekends be 2 or 3 times higher than their weekdays as far as DOAs go. And that certainly would suggest an opportunity to have a discussion on retraining and refocusing that group or that team that operates on the weekends. So again, Maternity Tracker has a lot of different filters you can set if you want to look at DOA rates, or look at twinning rates and impact on cows. You can put those twin cows in temp groups to look at impacts on production or metabolic issues. We're not going to do that today. Again, we covered a lot of that. I want to try to shift gears and go into a few different things that are pertain to some of the comments and questions we received. So I'm going to go ahead and close that. I'll just check briefly again, Barry, make sure there's still no questions.
Yeah, here's one that's, I think, relevant to what you've discussed so far is with Conception Tracker, and this may apply to the other trackers as well. How far back would you consider the data to be reliable? A year, a couple years? How do you think about that?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I would I've looked at Conception Tracker data, you know, going back many years. Some of that depends on how long the cows are archived in the herd settings. So you can obviously, a lot of those cows leave the herd or will leave the herd. If you get back 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years, those cows are gone, and PCDart can be set up to archive those cow records for. It's up to the producer. There's variability there to how big of a file they want to create when they do that backup, et cetera, et cetera. Some can set it to 0. You can set it much longer than that. So I don't know the exact settings right now off the top of my head, but I know there's the ability to manipulate how long cows are archived in the records, and that will have an impact on how much data and how far you can go back in time. So that's something I could look up and get back if that individual wants to reach out after the webinar and get me their contact information. But it's a great question. Once you have that set up properly, the data will go back as far as you tell it to.
Thanks.
All right. So I need to correct myself there. When I was talking about that gestation length, what I was referencing actually was days in the close-ups, not dry periods. Obviously, those first lactation aren't receiving dry periods, but they are getting moved into a close-up pen. And if we're dictating that off their calving date, a lot of times we might be shortchanging those first lactation animals for time in that pen. And so that's something that I'm looking at, similar to second lactation. If there's a difference between second and thirds, as those first lactation go into their second lactation, that's where the dry period comes in. So again, looking at those gestation lengths. Where I see that most impacted is when heifers are moved prior to calving. If they're reared off site and they're moved just prior to calving or a few weeks before, depending on cow flow. So I'll usually take a little harder look at that when I know that heifers are getting juggled around a little bit or trucked. So we'll shift gears here a little bit. Looks like we're about half an hour in. We've got a few different things to cover. I'm going to go back into Activity Tracker. I will point out there's a few other trackers in here that I didn't cover, Heifer Tracker and Inventory Tracker. They're just like the other trackers. They're very intuitive, so I'd encourage you guys to play around in those. I didn't focus on them for these talks. I'm going to go back into Activity Tracker and bring that up because there were some questions about creating different graphs for events. And this is where the events live in PCDart, is in this activity list. And I'm going to go ahead, I'm just going to select all of them so that I can show you a few ways that you can view this data. Obviously, this is going to give you a nice table with the counts by a month, and I showed you last time how you can look at that by days in milk if you want to. But what I didn't show you was the ability to graph some of this without having to dump it into Excel. So any of these numbers, if I take these, and let's just start with sold. If I right click on that sold number, and I'm doing a split screen here, I didn't know it was going to do that. So I apologize, folks. That's sending the dialog box off onto my other screen. And so I'm not going to be able to mimic that for you. What I'm getting, bear with me for just a second here. We're going to try something and fix this because I want you to be able to see how this works. What it's giving me the ability to do is select and display that information in a bar graph or a scatter plot. And I believe those were the options that people were looking for when we got some feedback. I'm going to try to just duplicate my displays since I have two screens running, and take me just a second here, but I think we can make this work. I apologize for that. Barry, can you still see the screen?
Not right now. You might have to try sharing again.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna share this screen now. Is that coming up now for you?
There we go. Yep, we can see the browser right now.
Okay, I apologize everyone, but now we're on track. So if I right click on that 755, that's the piece that wouldn't come up. It was going to my other screen. You can see I get a little dialog box here that says bar graph and scatter plot. So if I wanted to look at those sold events and I wanted to see them over the last 12 months by month, I can select that and I can get this nice display in a bar graph that shows when those animals left by the month that they left in. I can also look to see if I want to know when those animals left by their days in milk. I have the option between 7, 10, and 30-day increments. I'll go ahead and pick 10 to show you here today. And I can see when the animals are leaving the herd by their days in milk. Obviously, the majority of them are leaving at the tail end of their lactation and at the very beginning and then on throughout. But there's a lot of flexibility in how you can look at any of the data in here just by right clicking. And the other one I wanted to show you was the pregnancies, because that was a question. One thing I do like to look at here with the bar graph with the pregnancies by 10-day increments, it gives you a nice display of when these pregnancies are occurring in the herd. And one question that came in was how to calculate percent of the herd pregnant by 150 days in milk. There's no standard way. That's not created by PCDart as a standard metric, but you can get at that number. So here, obviously, it'd take a little bit more work, but I could draw a box around these bars out to 150 days in milk. I could figure out how many are in each bar, and I could add that up to see and do the math that way. That's a little bit longer. That's pretty painful. So there is a better way, and I'm going to show you a standard report you can build with crosstabs. That's the way that I look at it. But before we go there, again, I just want you to see that there's a lot of functionality with preg rate, or excuse me, with activity tracker and how you can graph this information. Again, you can look at number of pregnancies generated, by week, and so on and so forth. Let's go ahead and jump out now, and I'm going to show you that report that I built to look at percent of the herd pregnant by 150 days in milk. There's a fair bit of debate, folks, about how to properly calculate this number, and I'm not going to say that I have it correct here, but I'll show you the main ways, because you can get at it with the same report just by setting your filters differently. I'm going to show you the way that I have it set up, and then you can make the decision on the number that you want to use. So just like last time, we're gonna open up this report. You can see the database item numbers I have to display here. We were important. I am going to look at only cows that are currently in the lactating herd, and I'm going to leave my subgrouping set up for my major sort being reproductive code. And I'm going to just want to look at pregnant animals in that group because I'm looking for cows pregnant by 150 days in milk. And you can see I have days open here set to 1 to 150. And you could use, if you wanted to, you could use days in milk at conception. It's going to end up with the same date. But as you guys are building these reports, I just wanted to point out again, the search bar to be able to find the database items you want. And so I could change that to 174, which is days in milk at conception, but I'm going to sort it the same way. So I'm going to view that in crosstabs, and then I'll explain what we're looking at here. So what you've got, sorry, Barry, I got to move you out of the way a little bit here. What you've got now is we've got two different distinct bar clusters. On the left here are all my pregnant animals, and on the right are going to be everybody else, my culls and my opens. And then my red are the cows that got pregnant between 1 and 150 days in milk, and the rest are the rest. So 42% of the herd in this dairy was pregnant by 150 days in milk, and that's 42% out of every cow on the dairy currently in a lactation. And I can click on this to just verify that I'm looking at the right information. These are all pregnant cows. and they start at 62 days open and go to 150. And these are all my open cows. And these are also my cull cows. So some of the debate comes in as to what animals to include in the denominator here. Do we include cows that are not eligible to get pregnant that were culls? Maybe that they could have been culled as fresh cows. If you don't want to include those, then you could exclude those. And we would do that pretty easily by coming into the controls and filters and saying repro code, and we don't want the C cows. So we're going to exclude the C cows. And when we do that and view it in crosstabs, it's going to change our percentages a little bit because we've just removed all the C cows. So we're up to 45% of the herd is pregnant by 150 days in milk when we're not considering cull cows. Now, another way that people look at this number, I know, is to look at the percent that are pregnant out of all the cows that got pregnant. So very similarly, if that's the way you like to evaluate that metric, then all we would have to do here is change this for just pregnant cows and view that in crosstabs. And now we would see of all the cows that got pregnant in this dairy, 84% of them were pregnant by 150 days in milk. So there's a few different ways that you can get at that number, depending on how you want to calculate it. And if you wanted to remove other eligible cows or ineligible cows, I should say, it would just be a matter of setting up your filters to do so. But this is a way that you can quickly find percent of cows pregnant by 150 days of milk on a dairy. If you want to plot this over time, you're going to have to record this number somewhere and keep that running total. If you want to look at this more longitudinally, there's no way that I'm aware of to go back in time and pull this number out of PCDart at this time. So any questions on the 150 day in milk percent pregnant?
That makes sense to me, Doug. Maybe a related question. What's the easiest way to get a projection of calvings? Or I know a report, but is there an easy way to get a graph of calvings coming in the next 6 months?
Oh, sure, absolutely. So so if you wanted to look, the way that I would do that is and we'll see if I'm getting at what you're interested in here, Barry, but I would simply do a crosstabs and I would do it by days till due. And I would say, all right, show me all the cows that are due in the next 30 days, in the next 30 to 60 days, 90, and so on and so forth. And you could go out as far into the future as you wanted to do. I'll add that as a control rate now and look at that in crosstabs. And so now here's all the animals that are due. There's 136 due in 1 to 30 and so on and so forth. As we showed last time, if you wanted to stratify that by lactation, I'll do that again for those that may not have seen that one. Maybe you want to know how many heifers versus how many older cows, and so we can add that in the mix. And so now I've got that piece, and if you remember, we can stack that bar if you like to look at it that way. And so now I've got the number of first lactation calving, the number of mature cows calving.
Perfect, thank you.
I will show one more quick way. If you're looking at projection calvings, they did build a tracker for that. So I was so used to doing it that way that sometimes I forget it's up here. But an inventory tracker is where you can go and get pretty good projections. There's a lot of settings here, obviously. A lot of producers might want to see what cows are going to be in milk, you know, in 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, how many cows will they be milking? We have to make some assumptions on cull rates, DOA rates, things that way. So you can get pretty detailed here with setting some of these individual numbers, but I'm just going to preview it as it stands and show you what this graph looks like. And so you're going to get a projection of by month, the number of animals that are milking. You can see it's going to project out how many cows are going to be milking in this herd, the number that are going to be first lactation, and then you can see here cows to calve. So left in March, this is an older backup, so that's why we still have cows to calve in March, but there's 20 left in March, and you can see the number of mature cows I have to calve, the number of heifers that I have to calve. These are zeros because this farm exports their heifers to a heifer grower, and so that pregnancy data is just not in their system yet. Excuse me. And there's a lot of more information here that the producer can use, or you could use to project out facility loads or calvings if you wish. Also has the ability to go into past inventory to see what the number of milking animals were. So
Nice,
we'll
thank
back.
you.
Yes, yep, absolutely. We'll back out of there, and we're going to go back into the user-defined graphs. So we've got about 20 minutes left, and there were some questions on more of these user-defined graphs that exist and kind of tracking, looking at transition quality. And so I know fourth week milk is something that's pull in fourth week milk by calving date. And I'll show you how that's built quick again. We went over this really fast in the last session. I'm just going to edit the report that I already have built. But all you need to do when you create these reports is you'll hit new, and you can give it a title, and then you're going to pick 2 database items to plot to make this scatter plot. In this case, I use last calving date and fourth week milk. Okay, and then I'm going to hit OK. It's going to populate that report here. I'm going to highlight it and click plot. And we're going to take a look at when PCDart can catch up to us. We're going to take a look at fourth week milk by calving date. Again, I've got my outlier 1300 day in milk heifer here. That's kind of making my graph look funny. So I'm going to get rid of her, and I can see fourth week milk over time by calving date. Now I've got all the cows here. I'm going to take the trend line out, and maybe you just want to look at a specific lactation. You can partition this by lactation. And so now I've got different colors representing each lactation group. I can also filter it. Something I pointed out last time on the reports, and I want to point it out on these standard graphs or these user-defined graphs as well, is that it's going to default to only looking at cows in their current lactation or that are active. And if you want to look at, in my opinion, if you're looking at transition quality, you can't ignore the cows that left the herd. So you need to tell these reports to include those cows. It will default to only looking at the active animals. So come in here, click this filter to include both active and left herd cows. And then you can stratify it by lactation or isolate the lactation you're looking for. I'm going to go ahead and just look at first lactation, and I'm going to click OK. And so now I've got a scatter plot of all the cows, including left herd. And the way I look at this is I'll put my crosshairs in again. I'm going to drag them all the way over to the right. And I'm going to pick a point here where I've got 10% of my cows underneath the line, roughly. And so at that point, we're somewhere in that 65 pound range, 70 pound range. Maybe I want to take all these cows under the line. You can decide what a transition failure is for you. I'm not sure. I'm going to debate what that number is, but wherever you want to define a transition failure based off their startup milks, you can go ahead and set that line and say, okay, I want to know if there's anything that these red dots underneath my line have in common. So we want to ferret that out or chase that a little bit. And knowing that 65 is going to be my number in this case, we'll go back and use what we learned last time by assigning temp groups. And I've got a report here called temp group for low fourth week milk. I'll go ahead and edit that to just show how it's built. And you can see I've got their index and their lactation number here on the right. And I had been playing with this a little bit. So my first lactation, not second, because that's what we just pulled in. And we used a cutoff of 65 pounds. So I'm going to say up to 65 pounds, first lactation to first lactation. This is my OR statement to make sure I'm including the left herd cows. And then my fourth week milk is going to be anywhere from 1 to 65 pounds because these are my transition failures. I'm not subgrouping. I'm not concerned with that at this point. I'm going to save that report with those filters. And if you recall, we can add them into a temp group. And I can do that by simply putting a number over here. We're going to use 20. And by opening the report, I've now entered all of those cows into a temp group. If you look in the upper right-hand corner here, I can see temp group number is 20. And now that I've effectively put all those cows in a temp group, I can go back to the temp group analysis for milk production report that we made in the last session. I can edit that. And I can say, all right, I want to compare only that temp group 20 group to the rest of their cohorts, which again is the first lactation that's in milk and the first lactation that is left. And I'm going to put that into crosstabs. So now you might be able to ferret out if there's any differences. I'm going to look at the count. So here's my 124 animals out of 1,000 that are outside that temp group. And I can see, all right, what was the difference in 4th week milk? Wow, it was quite substantial. We're average of 54 with an average of 88. And maybe I'll look and see, did those heifers calve in too young? Let's take a look at that. Well, they were on average a month younger. The downside to this is we're getting the mean. We're not going to get the distribution. But if you're interested in that, all you've got to do is click on that bar and you can sort this and you can see the number of animals. You could dump this into Excel if you want to see what the standard deviation is and get an idea of if that is a significant difference. You can put whatever database item currently calved in with a somatic cell issue compared to their cohorts, almost half a linear score higher. We could also look at days and close-ups. We talked about defining that in the last session. Very similar in this case, only a day difference on average between cows that were over the threshold we set. So hopefully you see how you can use those tools to kind of identify a group of animals, where the failures might be occurring, and then dump them into their own cohort group so you can start to tease out what's impacting and what's causing the problem for that herd. I'm going to take a quick pause there before I move into a different type of report, Barry, and see if there's.
Yeah, here's a question that you kept having, that one animal that's an extreme outlier. If you do want to use a trend line, when you zoom in to ignore that outlier, it doesn't appear that the trend line is adjusted to exclude that data point. Is that correct? Or is there any way to adjust that if so?
Yes, that is correct. I believe you can change the limits on. That's a good question. Now we're venturing into waters that I did not prepare, but I believe we can change our axes here. And how this relates to the date is, there we go. That's what I was looking for. So if I want to remove that cow, she's back on 8/16. So I'm going to change this. And let's say we want to jump forward to, we'll just do 10/7/2018 and hit OK. There we go. So we close that and then go ahead and show our trend line. And so I've excluded that cow from the data set. I don't know if I did that too fast, so I'll go back through it one more time. By hitting the edit button up here, I can get into these chart settings. I can go to the axis tab, and then I can pick what axis I want to adjust. It will be set to automatically adjust. You'll have to untoggle that, manipulate where you want to set your limits. So yes, that is possible.
Perfect, thank you.
All right, good question. Good question. So as I thought about some other things that we could include today, one was I'm getting a lot of questions, and I know probably a lot of people are with what's going on in our industry about how to reduce milk. So how do I identify cows to cull? How do I identify, maybe drying cows off early? Things like that, getting creative with how to reduce milk, which is a little bit different approach to what we're used to. We're always chasing more production. Now we're trying to reduce it in a strategic way. So one thing that I wanted to show you that it kind of combines user-defined graphs and again, crosstabs is a report I set up. I had a producer ask, or there's been discussion about culling their worst cows. How do I identify them, and how do I remove those cows? And we're not going to debate how to identify what a bad cow is. We can use milk, we can use energy corrected milk. In this case, I use net merit. You can pick whatever you want and create this report. All I did was scatter plot the net merit value of the individual cows by her calving date. And I'm going to put this up here. And what I want to identify in this herd, and again, we've got our outlier there, but I'm not so concerned with that right now. I'm going to remove the trend line, and I want to identify where that 10%, the bottom 25%, let's say, of the herd exists. So I'm just going to move that bar up until there. I'm at 25% now, is underneath my line, and that's at about 200 net merit dollars. Okay, now we've got different lactation groups in here, so really I should, let's just focus on older cows, because that's going to cause a big difference. Let's do that again for just third lactation. I'm going to take that up until I get to about that 25% mark, as close as I can get it. And we're at about 125 net merit dollars. So cows in this herd under 125 net merit dollars would be the bottom quartile of cows from a net merit standpoint. Now, what we don't want to do is go out and just cull a bunch of animals and create a hole in the cow flow for this dairy. So what they're interested in is, how do I identify those cows each month that are my low cows? And so by knowing those cows threshold for their quartile, I can come here, and I created this report already, but I'm going to go ahead and open this up so you can see how it's put together. And I've got a few different database items listed here, and I'm only going to look at mature cows, 3 to 20. And so this is where the crosstabs is built. I'm filtering by days in milk and 30-day increments. So I'm looking at the cows distributed across their lactation. You could also do this by calving date if you wanted to, look at who's going to be freshening and making a decision on who to remove from the herd. And then I'm going to minor sort it by net merit. So I've got my bottom group here. I'm going to take negative 1,000 to 125. So that's my low group. And then I've got everybody else. And if I view that in crosstabs, it's going to give me this nice distribution of cows by 30 days in milk. And if I set this to net merit, you can see that I've got, and this is my low quartile group. So each one of these red bars represents cows in each day in milk window that are in the low end of the net merit for the herd. And so the producer, if this was set up on his report, or if you were consulting and wanting to take him this information, I can just click on that list. I can see that in this 30-day in milk window, I've got these cows that are low net merit. Further out in lactation, once they've had some test days, I'll have some information, maybe like somatic cell. We know they're low net merit. We can also see these cows have had a lactation somatic cell problem. Again, you can put in whatever database items might be important to you or to the producer, but this would be a way to try to stratify and break out who those lower cows are by using a few different tools in PCDart. And then you would have to go back through and do this, for each individual lactation group. I think you'd want to assign, those quartiles by lactation. Those are going to be significantly different, both on production and genetic merit standpoints. So you certainly want to be careful there. But there's a quick way to do that, and I'll show you that. That's a little trick, I guess, if you're not aware of it in PCDart. I've already have this report built. And I want to build it again, but I want to look at it for second lactation, let's say. So all I have to do is highlight that, right click, and I can copy that whole report to a new number. And it asks me what number I want to make it. 88 is fine with me. So I go ahead, and all of a sudden you can see I've got a duplicate report here below. Now, if I want to do this for second lactation, all I need to do is edit that new report, and I can say, okay, we're going to make this for second lactation. I'm going to have to change my filters, of course, to make sure we're looking at the right information. And beforehand, I went ahead and did this. I know that my bottom quartile for second lactation is actually 275 net merit dollars and under. So I'll change those two, and I can cross tab that, and I can throw that in here with the same concept. And I can see here's my lower net merit second lactation, same concept. They can go ahead and look at those together. You could build a report to do the same thing. I like this visually displayed. I like the interactivity of it. You could just build a standard report to print off that might be easier to use, but this kind of shows you how some of the tools interact. And then I can go ahead and save that. And now I've got both reports without having to totally rebuild those from scratch. Barry, any questions there? I've got one more thing to go into before we wrap up, but I should pause probably.
No, that's terrific. I guess PCDart can't solve the problem if your bulk tank doesn't go down when you take out a few cows.
Right. No guarantees, right? Yeah. So the last thing I wanted to show you, and again, we ended up not getting through everything, but these herd graphs, there's these standard reports that exist, these scatter plots in PCDart. One is previous somatic cell and current somatic cell. We didn't touch on any somatic cell information, and I thought we really should while we're in here. This is a graph I really like to use. It uses those crosshairs, but I wanted to make a key point on how it's calculating some things. So this is looking at cows in their current lactation, what their previous somatic cell score plotted along the bottom, and what their current somatic cell score is on the left. If I introduce the crosshairs, what we'll do is go ahead and set those at 4 and 4, using 4 as our infected cutoff. And so now we've got 4 quadrants that these cows exist in. And the nice thing that PCDart will do for you is it'll go ahead and calculate how many cows exist in each one of those quadrants. I can see I've got 2,082 in the lower left, and that's 92% of the herd. And this is going to be a little easier to explain. I created a slide for this. I'm going to go ahead and show that right now. So I can just make a couple key points. Of course, it's going to try to do that to me, and we'll kick that back over. Are you seeing the slide or the presenter view, Barry?
I see the slide. That's perfect.
Okay, good deal. So what I'm doing is just mimicking what we were looking at in PCDart. And like I said, we've got 4 quadrants. So we've got the quote unquote normal group in the bottom left hand, because those cows had a low score and they were low again. So that's great. Up in the upper left-hand corner, we've got new infections, because those cows were low last test and now they're high. So they're newly infected. Upper right are chronic. They were high last test. They're high again this test. And in the lower right, we have the cures, because they were high last test and now we're low. So where you want to be careful, and what I know I've seen happen before, is making the assumption that these are our new infection rates. Our chronic rates, our cure rates. And I think we want to be careful there. What PCDart's going to calculate for you is the percent of the herd that are new infections. So we have 2.1% of all of the cows in this group that are newly infected. And we have 3.7% of the cows in the entire herd that are chronically infected. What I'm interested in looking at are the rates of infection. And so that's a different calculation, and you're going to have to do some math. So new infection rate is going to be taking all the cows that existed on these left 2 quadrants and using those to do our math. So it's going to be the 47 that have a new infection only divided by the cows that were eligible to be newly infected, because any cow to the right of our vertical line here was already infected. She can't be a new infection. She was high last test. And that gives us a new infection rate of 2.2%, not significantly different than what was calculated, but where you'll see the big difference is on your chronics and your cures. So by only using the 83 that were chronically infected and the 41 that were also high last test, that's a total of 200 or 124 animals. I can see that 67% of the cows that could have gone chronic did go chronic in between the last 2 test days, which is obviously significantly different from 3.7. If you don't do that and track the rate that way, it really gets diluted out. Any changes in that chronic and cure rate get diluted out because of the high number of cows that exist in the herd. And obviously cure rates are the same. It's just the inverse of the calculation above. So very valuable tool. I'm going to go ahead and exit out of that and pull back up PCDart real quick and just point out that the the same concept occurs. So this is looking at cows currently in the milking groups. You can also look at their previous lactations last somatic cell score. That's a mouthful, but all you're looking at is what was their somatic cell on the last test before they went dry, and what was their somatic cell on the first test after they freshened in. So now we can evaluate using the same math and the same concepts. We can evaluate cows picking up new infections through the dry period or the calving pens and drill down into there. So those do exist as well. Lactation curves, I know we're running a couple minutes over, but this should just take a second. This is another graph that I wanted to kind of show a few of the details about. PCDart will plot a lactation curve for you. That's pretty standard, pretty straightforward. We can go ahead and partition that by lactation. You can see how the lactation groups are doing, but there's a couple things depending on the size of herds you're looking at that I wanted to point out. If I click on any one of these lines, and it's going to be a little difficult again because my cursor's a little different size for me, but I can click on it, I can see the number points behind the line. And that's important when you start working with some smaller herds and you might see some erratic numbers or some things moving around. So if you're wondering why you get these jagged numbers out here to the right, well, you're starting to work with a lot less data. It really impacts how smooth that line's going to be. And you can have, you can set that to make sure you're only including a specific number of data points if you choose to. So down here where it says minimum in the average, right now it's set to 1. So as long as there's one animal, it's going to include that data point. And that's fine if that's what you want to do. But maybe you say you want it to be 25 or you want it to be 50 animals. You can go ahead and set that setting. It will exclude them. So right now I've got 22 cows out here at the end. If I, and then 38 before that, if I set this to 50 and hit enter, it's going to go ahead, it's going to lop off any